She is the founder director at the Human Factor and the co-founder at Tattva CX LLP, Miss Neena Sali.
It's clarity and understanding what is right for the organization and what needs to be done from a business perspective and from a larger societal perspective as well.
So from diversity initiatives to the rise of remote work, how do you think the approach to leadership hiring has shifted? And what's been the biggest challenge in adapting these challenges?
Having certain systems in place and processes in place which will drive the person to achieve their best.
Hello everyone and welcome back to FaceTime with Leaders, powered by Directors Institute, World Council of Directors. I'm your host Sunny Pancholi, and today we are diving deep into the world of executive search, talent acquisition and leadership consulting. Our guest today is a pioneer in the world of executive search and career consulting. For over 2 decades, Ms. Neena Sali has helped shape the leadership teams of some of India's most prominent organizations. From leading successful search mandates across diverse industries to building and scaling recruitment firms, Ms. Neena has been at the forefront of the talent acquisition space. She is the founder director at the Human Factor, a full-service boutique executive search firm, and the co-founder at Tattva CX LLP, a BPO solutions provider. She has also been a mentor, a consultant, and an advocate for diversity in the executive search space, having worked with global firms like BTI Consultants and Pedersen and Partners. Ms. Neena, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Sunny. It's been a pleasure to meet you and be on the show. I'm excited about the conversations that we would be having further.
Likewise. So let's dive straight in. Ms. Neena, you have spent over 20 years shaping leadership teams and guiding career transitions. But every great career has its own unique journey. So can you take us back to the beginning and share with us the moments that truly shaped your path? You know, those turning moments, challenges, decisions that still resonate with you today?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's been many years ago. I know it makes me sound old, but nevertheless. To step back into my career, I need to tell you a little bit about myself as a person. So early on in my early stages of life, I've been much of an introvert, not really an extrovert. I mean, people today may not believe it, but I was an introvert then. And I realized pretty soon, that if you're an introvert and getting out into the corporate sector is not going to be easy if you don't speak up, right? I mean, nobody knows your value unless you speak about your value. So I decided to test myself through fire and I got into sales. And that was the beginning of my career of corporate life, so to speak. Having tested myself through it and touchwood, successfully managed that piece, I then one day came across an advertisement in Midday, newspaper, which was a edition of the Mumbai newspapers, and there was an advertisement for a recruitment consultant. That intrigued me because we were in the time of employment exchanges. So I'm talking about really years ago. And I realized this was something very different from what was, on offer in different industries at that point of time. And I decided to understand and check out what this was all about. When I met up with them and I understood what it was all about, it really intrigued me. And I took the leap of faith to join the organization. And that's where I honestly built from ground up my knowledge about the industry. Of course, I followed it up with a master's degree and all of that. But aside of that, I learned how organizations exist, what are the dynamics, what are the structures, what are the different functions, and how they kind of cohesively work together as one entity. That was really the beginning and the learning that have stayed with me to date as well right now. So, continuing through that journey, working with different firms, different geographies that I worked in. Later on in life, I took a maternity break, which is a slightly longish one than most people take. I had the luxury of doing that, so I took a longer break. And once I came back, like I said, I talked about my earlier times when when we were talking about employment exchanges, was also the time when we had the rotary dial phones. You went through yellow pages, and that was the way you did your headhunting. Cut to the time when I joined back, and everything had changed. Suddenly, you had PCs come in. That was the advent of PCs, right? There was this boom that happened suddenly, and everyone was on PCs. We had the internet that came in, and everything changed. The way you conducted search changed, and suddenly you were faced with this daunting task of looking at the World Wide Web, and you were like, looking at search engines and trying to figure out how that happened. Upskilling was on the job. There was really no time to, go and do a course and all of that. So it was all on the job. Learning Word, Excel, everything, was on the go. And while the technology piece, I mean, was not so difficult, but getting back and getting to where I wanted to be was a bit of a challenge, because one of the earliest searches that I remember, and I'm going to give you this example because I think it's very important for people in this industry to understand what it takes to really be good at what you do. I think the search that I began with was and I was always in leadership hiring. I was doing this search for a company which was looking for an India director. It was a delivery center, so it was a cost center, and they wanted to make it into a profit center. So therefore, they wanted to hire somebody who would bring in that kind of skill sets. Now, keeping that in mind, the kind of people we were looking at, the kind of organizations we were targeting, we were just struggling with the people that we were getting on board. We decided to spread our search across geographies, and all of that took time. It took me 8 months to be precise. I think 6 months down the line, including my MD, everybody told me, you know what, I think let's just let this be, because it seems like one of those impossible searches. And believe me, there are some of them as well. So I said, okay, give me 2 months more. I said, if I don't crack it in 2 months, I will give it up. In those 2 months is when I put my all into it, and it did turn around. I did get through the big breakthrough that I was looking for. So, and I think that changed the entire relationship with the client. Suddenly, the client who was looking at us from a perspective of saying, can they really deliver, to one who looked at us for advice. So you became a trusted advisor. And that's what to date I retain as a value that I add to my clients, is being a trusted advisor to them. So, perseverance, the tenacity to say, I'm going to dig deeper, if this doesn't work, adapt to something different, change the way you're looking at, and make that happen. I think, innovation is the name of the game. So all of these factors is really what took me through that phase. Long story short, we continued with that business. I moved from Bombay, I moved to Pune, and then I joined another search firm here. And during this time, somewhere along the line, I think all of us have this, we have a bit of an entrepreneurial itch in us. And I think that was kind of digging at me, saying, try doing something by yourself. And it was during that time that I met up with a couple of people who were very interested in backing me up and saying that, let's set this up together. Did set that up together. And I must say, it was one of the worst decisions of my life. I probably didn't do the research well enough in terms of understanding their intent, their values and my values and cultural was completely different. We were very differently aligned to each other. More importantly, the investment in the business that was required was not forthcoming. I suffered a lot of losses, but I decided to, make the most of it, cut my losses, moved on, and went back to the corporate sector because, as a single mother, had to put food on the table, right? So you've got to do what you got to do. And I moved back to the corporate sector. I said, hey, let's go back into that. And that's where I joined another search firm where I was heading their diversity practice. That's what they brought me in for, which was very interesting because, diversity has been a mandate for most organizations for a long time. And it was also mandated to have a certain percentage on board as well. So we started with that, and I was continued to work in the industrial sector for them as well. And it was, great going. Things were looking up. Everything was fine. I had financially settled in. And that's when, again, the entrepreneurial it said, start again. And I said, okay, this time I'm going to take a more calculated risk, right? Because what's life without risks? Yeah, you've got to take those risks to reach somewhere in life. So I said, okay, let me think this through. So made my project, made my business plan, looked at it and said, okay, now's the time. So January 2020, and you'll be surprised at the timings of what I'm saying, is when I started the search firm. March 2020, and we had the pandemic hit us, and how? And I questioned myself and I said, did I do the right thing? But I think I did do the right thing because I'm based in Pune. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic, as you'll understand, is the pharmaceutical industry and the chemical industry was soaring. They were doing a lot of business because of the need of the hour, right? So whether it was your vaccines, whether it was the chemicals, whether it was, your things that were required to fight the pandemic. And I was working in those sectors very closely with these organizations. So suddenly work was booming. There was so much work that there were times when we were working literally 24 hours. And we continued doing that. We did some fantastic work. And it also helped that, you were kind of helping in your own small little way, work through the pandemic to help people. And I think that's what really helped me. It also taught me how to work hybrid, right? Because that was the need of the hour, because suddenly everything was remote working. So I think, to cut short a long story, that's been the journey so far. And that's where I am today with the kind of risks that I've taken. And I'm happy to say, I'm glad I took those risks.
Neena, that's such a vivid journey, and it really feels like we were right there with you. And I love how you brought in not just the triumphs, but also the struggles. That honesty makes it more powerful.
Yeah. You can't, like I keep saying, there can be no high if there's no low. So you can reach the highs if you've gone through the lows. Otherwise, what's the value of the high, right? So yes, I mean, we all go through the test of fire to reach where we have to. Yeah.
Absolutely. So continuing our conversation, Ms. Neena, with over 2 decades of experience in executive search and talent acquisition,
Right.
you have seen how industries evolve and adapt, especially when it comes to attracting top talent. Now,
Yes.
in a world of talent acquisition, the way we approach leadership roles and organizational growth has undergone a major transformation in recent years. So, from diversity initiatives to the rise of remote work, how do you think the approach to leadership hiring has shifted? And what's been the biggest challenge in adapting these challenges and
Oh,
the
yes.
changes?
Of course, sorry. I think, yeah, the change has been immense. I mean, and like I said, I talked about when I started my journey to where we are today, with technology and all of that came along with it. Technology has its own pitfalls as well. But suddenly, leadership hiring specifically has been really, really changing. And the reason for this is a number of things, right? One is the fact that the pandemic hit us, and post-pandemic, suddenly, if you recall, in the earlier phase, people would always insist on face-to-face meetings. I mean, I have been part of interview panels, literally traveling across the country when they were doing the final interviews, because the client would like me to be part of the interviews to assess the candidate, to see if we're taking the right decision. And everything was based on how the candidate works, how firm is his handshake, what pedigrees he brings to the table, what's the domain expertise he brings to the table, which is fantastic to have, right? But there's a lot more in today's times. There's a lot more that a leader needs to have beyond just that. And when the shift happened to remote, when the shift happened to hybrid working, you suddenly found that these same leaders who had all of this were suddenly failing to do the same job in this kind of environment. And the reason for that was because they were not able to connect. Technology became a disadvantage to them, and suddenly they were struggling with it. I'm not saying everybody was struggling. A lot of people struggled. We struggle. I mean, I struggled too before we looked at it and said, okay, this is what it is, and this is what you got to live with. So let's make the best of it. And how do you change your perspective? I think when the shift changes from looking at something as an obstacle to looking at something and say, this can partner with me to work better. When that shift happens is when you are actually able to contribute better. And I think that shift took a little time for a lot of some people. But once that shift happened, then the way we looked at leadership hiring was not just about saying pedigree. Of course, that's important. But we looked at domain expertise. And again, we said, can we look at some, and when we talked about diversity, and I keep saying this, people refer to diversity as saying, okay, diversity is gender diversity. No, diversity is not just gender. Diversity is diversity in experience, diversity in the kind of industries you worked in. Because everything brings a fresh perspective, right? Your outlook to how things are done is different. If you've been in the same field for 20 years and then you move to another industry, you bring in the expertise of those 20 years into this industry, and you are able to bring the best practices. At the leadership level, we're talking about bringing in best practices. And that's what somebody can bring in, right? With that kind of diverse experience. So we talk, diversity was something that changed. Organizations looked at saying, okay, we are comfortable doing this. I've worked with not-for-profits, and believe me, I've brought in people from the corporate sector to run a not-for-profit as efficiently as they ran a corporate sector, because those are the best practices that one could bring in. The other thing that happened was a lot of the digitization. Suddenly, people started using metrics, right? You had a lot of data available to you. You started using assessment centers. Back in the day, also, we used them, but not so much so. The pitfall was that sometimes companies took the assessment center report as a standard to either fail a candidate or pass a candidate. Now, that's not all that the person is capable of, right? There's a lot more to a person than just what an assessment center brings in, because When you're doing an assessment also, and as most psychologists would also agree with me on this, is it's a different environment. So the environment is a great contributory factor to this. Also, how you read the report also makes a difference, right? So I think that was one of the pitfalls which we have slowly kind of moved away. So it's part of the process, but not something that alienates a candidate completely. The third thing, and I think the most important part, is how adaptable and agile your managers are. How quickly are they able to connect with the people, connect with the team, and lead them forward? I think that is important. Because you're working with hybrid teams, you're working with remote teams, you're working across geographies. I think that kind of is very, very important. The biggest savings, and I would bring this up because I think it's huge, is the cost of hire and the time to hire. Because suddenly everything was on VCs, right? So if I'm available today at 6 p.m. my time and the client is available in his time zone at 10 a.m. and the timelines match, we can have a meeting the very next day. Whereas otherwise, you would have to wait for his schedule, the client's schedule to kind of match, the travel and all of that came with it. So lot of difference in the way hiring is being done right now. It's faster, it's quicker, like I said, more agile as well. So that's great news because you no longer wait for an entire quarter for your sales director to come on board and you've lost an entire quarter in just hiring the person, right? So results are faster. So I think those are some of the major changes that I have seen. And I think the challenge has been for organizations is to walk the talk. Like all of them talk about gender, talk about the emotional quotient that is important, but some of them still kind of are lagging behind in actually walking that talk. But I guess they'll get there. I hope that answers your questions.
Absolutely, absolutely, Ms. Neena. So, enlighten me, in your career, you have not only shaped talent strategies, but also been deeply involved in building and scaling businesses like Tattva CX LLP and the Human Factor. Now, as a founder, how do you balance the demands of scaling your own organization while ensuring that your clients' talent needs are met with the same level of care and attention?
Oh, very interesting question. And I'm telling you, I mean, I would be honest to say it was a struggle in the beginning because they were at different stages, right? The human factor was pretty much set. The Tattva was we were, as a co-founder, we were just kind of scaling up, setting up. We had a very, very difficult target of 35 people to be onboarded in 2 weeks' time. While that might sound very simple, 35 people across different languages, and I'm talking about languages which is as diverse as Hebrew, Catalan, Dutch, Polish, and the likes of those. To getting those kind of people on board within a 2 week time, and you're starting from scratch, right? You have a blank canvas on you and you're starting to build that. So it took up a lot of my time and it took up a lot of my energy to kind of build that. And I distinctly recall this particular search that I was doing where we were hiring a CEO for a large multinational, and the entire thing all came together. So while I'm struggling to hire people here, I'm also running this search where I'm introducing the client to the candidate to the client, and we're working on all of those things. And I had to have several conversations with the candidate, setting expectations with the client, managing expectations because at the end of the day, our role as consultant is to bring both of them in a room where both take one step forward, and that's where the meeting happens, right? So trying to facilitate that. So it was a balancing act, but one that I think I have learned a lot from, and one that has really helped me. It made me more sharper. It made me more adaptable. It also taught me the value of doing things with a lot of checks and balances so that you don't fail, right? Because, of course, we were struggling with hiring the kind of people that we wanted to. Sometimes people would accept and not join, but I think those struggles we kind of worked around. I realized that how important it was for me to find the right person, and here I was helping another large organization build the talent pool with the right kind of person. So it taught me a lot of sharpness, I would say, a lot of understanding of scenarios, and that was the challenge, and also I think brought me into focus in managing both of them together.
So, Ms. Neena, the way you treat client work as an ongoing experiment and not a transactional hire, that's a strong differentiator, and it's rare and very very different. Great.
Yeah, one of the things I keep telling my clients is don't refer to as vendors, the moment, because the sourcing team comes to us with the commercials, right? And I say, don't refer to as vendors. The moment you refer to us as vendors, you're not going to get value out of us. Treat us as, like I said, trusted advisors, and that's where you'll get the maximum out of us.
Incredible. So at Tattva CX, you led a truly global outsourcing business, 19 plus languages, a team across 20 countries, and clients from a US giant operating in 200 countries to Cyprus-based firms focused on India. How have you built a model that works globally while staying locally relevant? And what lessons have you learned about cross-border leadership and delivering consistent quality across such diversity?
True. I think it's been a learning experience. There's no denying that. And when we started off with Tattva, we were very clear about the kind of organization we wanted to build, right? We were very clear on the value system that we're going to get into the organization. And believe me, people across the globe, different countries, different cultures, people still remain the same. What excites them, what works with them, the empathy that you can bring to the table, the understanding of their concerns that they bring to the table, and being able to give them, chart out a course that shows them what they can grow to. I think that is standard across. I mean, whether I'm hiring in India, whether I'm hiring in the US, or I'm hiring in Somalia for that matter, doesn't really change. People will still have the same triggers that matter for them, right? So whether giving them the right kind of opportunity that works for them. Again, this was completely remote that we were hiring. So we had to sell the opportunity of saying, okay, here you're working in your house from a remote location doing this, where we bring you the knowledge of technology, where we bring you the path of working with a global company and setting you on the path of moving forward in life. I think all of those worked very well. We were able to talk to people with different backgrounds, and we realized one thing that was in common was that if you give them a mission and they think that they're part of the mission, then everybody works together. It kind of it just takes away the borders that you have. Everybody is in it together, and I think the core. When we were building this company, also one of the key things we did was to first build this operations team. That's this core support team that we have, which is your quality and your operations and all of that. Top-notch people that we hired. They came on board because they believed in the vision. They were not people who joined us as employees. They joined us as people who were part of the company. So there's a bit of ownership in everyone. So whenever we welcome somebody on board, we always say, welcome to the Tattva family, because that's what we call it. And that's how we treat our employees. They're all our family. So everyone who's associated with us is part of a bigger family. We make it a point whenever we travel also to meet people there. We spend time with them, and we actually, have experiences firsthand with them. So building that along the way has been the key to how I've scaled this up to where we are today. Currently, we're across 40 countries. From 20 to 40 countries is what we've moved. We've got, like I said, people across multiple languages, and it's been an enriching experience, one that has really taught me the value of the human touch, the empathy that you can bring to the table. And after that, it's all about creating the mission and having certain systems in place and processes in place which will drive the person to achieve their best. Of course, the referrals and incentive schemes and all of that are all part of the game, right? Everybody does that. The differentiator truly is just being very much more humane. I think that's what's made the difference. And that for me has been the reason why I've been able to work this across different geographies.
Great. So let's move on to the next segment of questions. But before we do that, this is the favorite part of the podcast, at least for me. This is
Okay.
called rapid fire round. So quick questions, quick answers, no overthinking, just whatever first strikes to your mind, right? So are you up for it?
Absolutely. I'm looking
Okay, so
forward to
here's
this
the
one.
first question. If you could switch lives with someone for a day, who would it be and why?
Okay. I'd love to be a commercial pilot working across, somebody who basically flies across different countries, because I love traveling. So the more I get to see the world, the better it would be for me.
Great start to the rapid fire round. What's something quirky or unexpected on your bucket list?
I think I did that, right? The quirky and unexpected that I did on my bucket list was to join an industry which I had completely no knowledge of, and I think that's what I've done. So yeah, I probably ticked that off my bucket list already.
Absolutely. What's the most spontaneous thing you have ever done?
The most spontaneous thing I've ever done is, I think my daughter is a Kathak dancer, and I decided to just one day join her and start learning the dance form. So I think, yeah, that
Oh,
was probably the most spontaneous thing I've done.
great. Okay, next question. What's the last thing you Googled and why?
So I'm supposed to go for a client meeting this afternoon, and I Googled the closest coffee shop there because what's better than great coffee and great conversations?
Okay. What's a guilty pleasure you don't mind admitting?
Ah, yes. So on the weekends, I actually sit and watch these absolutely crazy comedies, or Christmas has just passed by. So watching these Christmas movies, they're great for grounding and de-stressing you. Yeah, and I absolutely know this about acknowledging that I do watch this to de-stress. Yeah.
Nice. If you had a time machine, would you go to the past or the future, and what would you do there?
I'd go to the future, and I'll tell you why. I'd go to the future to see all that I'm doing, what is that, what's happening in the future with it, and come back to the present so that I can make the changes so that I can achieve what I need to get there with.
All right. Okay, great. What's one thing you have always wanted to learn but haven't yet?
I mean, I've always wanted to learn a musical instrument, the tabla for sure, but never got around to doing it. That's something still on my list of to do.
Okay. What's a habit or routine that's been surprisingly life-changing for you?
So, once everyone got these mobile phones, we all have this nasty habit of getting up first thing in the morning and looking at it. I made a, change within myself, and I said I will not look at my phone. So the first hour when I wake up, and I'm a morning person, so I wake up early, don't look at my phone, make my bed, uh, structured in that sense, and go to the gym. It's when I'm going to the gym and making my bed is when I formulate my thoughts for what I'm going to do for the rest of the day. And that could be everything from what you're going to cook to what meetings you need to attend and what you need to do through the day. So all of that gets planned within that day. And I think that's really worked wonders for me.
Wow. So that was one that was sharp and that was warm. And it's always good to know the personal side of the professional.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on to the next segment of questions, and this is about the bigger picture, the challenges that the industry faces. Ms. Neena, tell me, with your extensive background in leadership consulting and executive search,
Mhm.
you have likely seen firsthand the importance of strong governance in organizations. Now, recently, there have been some notable instances where companies have faced governance challenges
Mm.
impacting their reputations and trust. So, in your opinion, what are the most common governance gaps or lapses you see in organizations today? And what steps should leaders take to ensure governance become a cornerstone of the company's culture, not just a compliance requirement?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the biggest gaps that is there is it's not the intent, honestly. I think in most organizations, the intent is to be compliant, right? But the behaviors don't kind of match with the intent. So, and I'll give you an example. And one of the reasons why this is of great importance and interest to me is during the course of my work with the human factor, we hired a CEO for a multinational. When he came on board and he had the first board meeting, he raised certain financial situations that were there, that were brought up within the organization for the board to take action on because they were, in his mind, they were serious issues and needed to be addressed. But the thing is, when the board came on board, and this I'm not even talking about an Indian company, but it's a multinational. But when the board got together, this, the thought process was that it's not hitting us right now. It's been going on for some time, so it's not really affecting us. So let's look at this later because the individual and the group of individuals who are doing that are key people right now for the business to run. In the short term, we need them to take us to the next stage of growth. So therefore, let's not address this now. Let's address this later. Now, here's a CEO who has come in fresh from a different background and wants to make the change, but is held back because the board does not cooperate or does not basically work with him to make that change. So they say they put it on the back burner. cut to 6, 8 months down the line, and there were fraudulent activities that happened. They had to get into an audit situation. There was a third-party audit. There were reports that were created, and everything then became crisis management, right? Now, something like this could have well been taken care of when this was first brought up, right? So it's important to, I think, most organizations don't like uncomfortable conversations. They don't like dissent. Now, and I'm saying dissent in a positive manner. When I say dissent, it's about voicing your opinion about things that are not going right. And I think most people kind of take a backseat on voicing that opinion. If the larger part of the board is kind of agreeing with something, everybody tends to agree with it. And that's the change that is really necessary. Because you can't have compliance in place if everybody is going to agree with the majority. It's not with agreement with the majority, it's about saying what is right. And that, I think, compliance has to be part of the mission of the organization, because that's when it transcends every level within the organization. Then everybody, for everyone, it's part of their job to do that, right? Compliance is not an option. It is something that you have to do. The moment you change that aspect of it, I think things become much more easy. Of course, you have to have checks and balances in place. You have to have accountability in place, because without that, even compliance will not work. So the governance part of it, which is required, is absolutely needs an entire different framework that needs to be put in place. The moment you have the framework, and this is always a top-down effect, right? You can't have it bottom-up effect, because it'll never work. So it has to be, the intent has to be from the board as it goes down the value system. And that's where you will see the change, and you will find organizations doing this more proactively. Because what happened 6, 8 months down the line was a very reactive situation then. You're doing crisis management, you're trying to figure out how to make things work. You don't want it getting out into the industry because, that's going to affect your reputation and all of that. This could have well been taken care of if the checks and balances were in place, if they had looked at that uncomfortable conversation and said, okay, let's take the action now. Pulling people in the right places at the right time is more important, because the risk of what you run when you put this on the back burner is far, far higher for organizations. So I think that's, to me, in my mind, I think good governance is not just control. And I think most people kind of relate it to control. It's not control, it's clarity. It's clarity in understanding what is right for the organization and what needs to be done from a business perspective and from a larger societal perspective as well. I think that's the most important part of it.
Rightly said, Ms. Neena. And your action list, roles, incentives, and incident closure feels like a boardroom checklist that actually works. Comparing governance to a systems problem rather than a compliance checkbox makes the whole issue much more solvable.
Very true.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So that brings us to the last question of the podcast. And let me ask you, you have been actively engaged with Directors Institute, an organization dedicated to building boardroom excellence and strengthening governance capabilities. So what inspired you to join the Institute in the first place? And how has this experience influenced your perspective on modern governance and leadership?
Yeah, so going back to the early experience when I talked of, and I've had several of similar experiences where, because I've been doing leadership hiring for the longest time, I have had several conversations with board members and CEOs where they've talked about how governance fails, how organizations don't make the changes that are necessary. I've also talked to leaders who are saying that, sometimes it's okay to let go. And I realized that governance is it's not something that you use when you need, when you want to, and leave it aside when you don't want to. It's something that has to be part and parcel of it. But I was trying to understand a better perspective and get a better framework around of my thought process. That's when I, joined the Directors Institute community. And believe me, the access to information that I've had, the different thought processes that I'm, getting to understand, and learning that I'm getting from here have been huge. So it has helped me frame my own thought process in saying, okay, how can it work with an organization? Not to forget, even a small organizations like the two that I run also have compliances in place that we need to adhere to. And we are very, very clear. I also come from a family background that's from the forces. So, value systems, ethical behavior is very, very important. And governance and compliance all falls within the same framework. And the DI community is absolutely fantastic in terms of reassuring you on what needs to be done, giving you the right information, the right pathways to kind of get to where you need to be. I think that's been the most important aspect for it, and one that really intrigued me when I joined. And I'm so glad that I have, because the learnings continue, and I'm just looking forward to the journey here on from there.
And we wish you luck for all your future endeavors. And let me tell you, and let me thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your incredible journey from shaping the future of talent acquisition to navigating the complexities of governance and risk. Your insights have been nothing short of inspiring, truly. And what stands out most is how you view together your deep understanding of leadership with a strong commitment to values like integrity, resilience, and social responsibility. You have truly shown us how governance and talent strategy can truly transform organizations, not just in terms of growth, but in creating a sustainable and ethical future. So, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your insights, and wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Sunny. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope that my small little way I'm able to contribute to the betterment of not just the corporate sector, but also to the society at large. But thank you so much for the interesting conversation we've had today.
Great, likewise. And to our listeners, today's conversation has been a rich blend of practical advice and visionary thinking. Whether you are in leadership, governance, or talent management, there are lessons here for all of us on how to lead with purpose, adaptability, and foresight. This has been FaceTime with Leaders, powered by Directors Institute, World Council of Directors. I'm your host, Sunny Pancholi, signing off for now. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and as I always say, lead with integrity. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next episode.